The night my parents told me I wasn't allowed to see my grandmother before she died, something inside me broke. I even drove to the hospital anyway, but security stopped me at the elevator. Immediate family only, they said. And apparently, I didn't count. My name is Lily Anderson. I'm 29 years old. And until that night, I believed that no matter how strained things were between me and my parents, blood still meant something. I was wrong. My grandmother wasn't just a relative. She was my safe place. Growing up, when my parents criticized my choices, questioned my independence, or compared me to other people's daughters, she was the one who quietly told me, "You're allowed to build your own life." She never raised her voice. She never demanded obedience. She just believed in me. When I decided not to join my father's corporate firm, when I started my own consulting business instead of chasing a predictable career path, my parents saw rebellion. Grandma saw courage. That difference mattered. Over the years, tension between me and my parents grew. Not explosive tension, just cold distance. The kind that builds slowly. Fewer invitations, fewer phone calls, more passive comments about stability and responsibility. But Grandma? She called every Sunday. She asked about my clients. She remembered the names of companies I worked with. She told her friends, "My granddaughter runs her own firm." She said it with pride, and that pride irritated my parents more than they ever admitted. When Grandma's health started declining, I offered to help. I arranged private nurses. I reviewed medical bills. I visited whenever I could, quietly, without making announcements. Then, 3 weeks before she passed, everything shifted. My mother called me one afternoon. "She's getting worse," she said flatly. "I'll come tonight," I replied immediately. There was a pause. "That won't be necessary," she said. My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It's stressful for her," she answered carefully. "Too many people." "I'm not too many people. I'm her granddaughter." Another pause. "We think it's better if you don't come." "Wait." That word again? "I'm coming," I said firmly. "You'll just upset her." My father's voice cut in from the background. "This isn't about you." But it wasn't about me. It was about goodbye. I drove to the hospital anyway. The hallway outside her room was quiet. Too quiet. My parents were standing near the door. My mother's arms crossed. My father's expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I'm not leaving without seeing her." My mother stepped closer. "She's resting. The doctor said minimal disturbance. I won't disturb her. I'll sit quietly." "No," my father said sharply. That word hit harder than I expected. "No." As if I were a child asking permission. As if I had no right. Before I could argue further, a nurse approached gently. "I'm sorry," she said. "We've been instructed immediate family only." I stared at her. "I am immediate family." She looked uncomfortable. "I can only follow the instructions given." And just like that, I was escorted away. I stood near the elevator for a long time, staring at the closed doors. I called Grandma's phone, even though I knew she couldn't answer. I texted her, "I'm here. I love you." No reply came. She passed away 2 days later. I found out through a voicemail. A voicemail, not a call, not a conversation. A message saying the funeral details would be sent. That's when I realized something deeper was happening. This wasn't just about hospital policy. This was control. At the funeral, my parents barely spoke to me. Relatives whispered. Some avoided eye contact, but several people approached quietly. "She talked about you constantly," one of Grandma's friends told me. "She was so proud." That sentence felt like oxygen. A week later, I received a formal letter from a law office requesting my presence for the reading of the will. My parents hadn't mentioned a will. They hadn't mentioned any legal matters at all. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, they were already seated. Neither looked pleased to see me. The attorney cleared his throat and began. Grandma had left specific items to various family members: jewelry, furniture, donations to charities she supported. Then he paused. "There is also a trust established under the name Lily Anderson." Silence filled the room. My mother blinked. My father straightened in his chair. The attorney continued calmly. "The trust contains controlling interest in her real estate investments and a significant portfolio of private holdings." I didn't fully process the numbers at first, but I understood one thing immediately. Grandma hadn't forgotten me. She had planned, carefully, intentionally. The attorney added, "There is also a letter addressed specifically to Lily." My hands trembled slightly as he handed it to me. I didn't open it there. I couldn't, because I could feel my parents' eyes burning into me. They had banned me from her final moments. But somehow, she had made sure I would never be erased from her legacy. And in that quiet, tense law office, I realized something. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a message, and I had a feeling the real conflict was only just beginning. I didn't open the letter at the lawyer's office. I couldn't. My parents were sitting across from me, stiff and silent, pretending the trust didn't shake them, pretending this was just another procedural formality. But I saw it, the tension in my father's jaw, the tightness in my mother's smile. They hadn't expected this, neither had I. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors. My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. My name was written in Grandma's handwriting, soft, slightly slanted cursive. She had written it herself. That alone made my chest tighten. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long. I unfolded the first page. "Lily, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to argue with your stubborn parents on your behalf." I laughed through tears. That sounded exactly like her. She continued, "I know they tried to keep you away. Don't be angry at the hospital. I gave the instructions. I knew they would try to control the situation. I didn't want my last moments to become a battlefield between you and them." I stopped breathing. She knew. She had known they would block me. And she had chosen peace over conflict, not rejection, protection. Tears blurred the page as I kept reading. "You have always been stronger than they understood. And that strength frightened them. Not because you were wrong, but because you were independent. Independent." That word again? My entire life, my parents had framed independence as rebellion. Grandma had framed it as courage. The letter continued, "I created the trust not as a reward, but as freedom. I want you to have choices, real choices, not the ones your parents approve of." My throat tightened. She wasn't just leaving me money. She was leaving me autonomy. Further down, the tone shifted slightly. "There is something else you must know. Your father has been managing certain family investments for years, some wisely, some carelessly. I have protected what I could, but if you choose to take control of the trust fully, you will discover details they would rather you not see." My heart pounded. Details they would rather I not see. Suddenly, this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about information, about power, about truth. The final paragraph hit hardest. "Do not let this divide you unless necessary. But do not surrender your position out of guilt. You deserve your place at the table." I folded the letter slowly. My emotions were tangled: grief, gratitude, confusion, and a growing awareness that something much larger was unfolding. If the trust included controlling interest in real estate holdings, and if my father had been managing investments carelessly, then this wasn't symbolic, it was structural. I drove home in silence, the letter resting on the passenger seat. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I called the attorney. "I'd like a full breakdown of the trust assets," I said calmly. There was a pause. "Of course," he replied. "You understand that exercising control may require restructuring." "I understand," I said. By the afternoon, I was sitting in a conference room reviewing documents, property holdings, investment portfolios, minority stakes in companies. And then I saw it, a line item indicating leveraged debt tied to one of the commercial properties, managed under my father's advisory oversight. My stomach dropped. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they were risky. Too risky for someone who constantly preached stability to me. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been criticized for starting my own consulting firm instead of joining the predictable corporate ladder. And yet, behind the scenes, financial decisions had been made that were anything but conservative. I asked the attorney, "Does my trust override his authority in these assets?" "Yes," he said carefully. "If you activate the controlling clause." Activate. That word felt heavy, because activating it would mean one thing. I would be stepping into a position my parents never believed I deserved. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone wasn't warm. It wasn't hostile either. It was cautious. "I assume this is about the will," I replied evenly. "Yes," she said. "You don't need to make this complicated." Complicated, as if I had created this situation. "I haven't done anything," I said. "That's exactly what we're concerned about. My father's voice entered the call. You don't understand the scale of responsibility involved. I almost laughed. I run a consulting firm, Dad. I manage corporate restructuring. This is family, he snapped. And business, I replied calmly. Silence. Then my mother spoke softly. Your grandmother didn't mean to create division. No, I said quietly. She meant to create balance. That ended the call. I realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about narrative control. For years, my parents had framed me as the unconventional daughter, the risky one, the one who needed guidance. Now, I had legal authority and information they couldn't filter. I stared at Grandma's letter again that night. You deserve your place at the table. The question wasn't whether I would activate the controlling clause. The question was how far I was willing to go. Because once I stepped forward, there would be no pretending this was just a misunderstanding. It would be a shift in power, and I had a feeling they weren't ready for that. I didn't tell them before I did it. I didn't warn them. I didn't threaten. I simply signed the documents. The controlling clause sounded dramatic, but legally, it was straightforward. As primary beneficiary of the trust, I had the authority to assume oversight of the protected assets. It didn't erase my father's past involvement, but it ended it. When the attorney emailed the confirmation, I stared at the screen for a long time. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't rebellion. This was responsibility. The first board-style financial review was scheduled 2 days later. My father was invited as a courtesy. He showed up. So did my mother. We sat across a long, polished table in the same law office where the will had been read. The air felt different this time. Professional, measured, and undeniably tense. The attorney began with a summary of asset performance. Stable real estate holdings. Strong long-term investments. Conservative dividend structures. Then he shifted to the leveraged commercial property. The room grew quiet. As you can see, he said, projecting the figures on the screen. The refinancing decision increased short-term liquidity but introduced exposure to market fluctuation. I glanced at my father. He remained still. The risk level, the attorney continued, is manageable under disciplined oversight. However, continued leverage would not be advisable. I leaned forward slightly. Who authorized the refinancing? I asked calmly. My father cleared his throat. I did. There it was. Not hidden, not deflected, just stated. And what was the long-term strategy? I asked. To accelerate returns, he said. It was calculated. Calculated, I repeated. The numbers on the screen told a different story. The returns hadn't accelerated. They had plateaued, and the exposure risk had increased. I didn't attack him. I didn't accuse. I asked one more question. If the market had dipped last quarter, what would have happened? Silence. The attorney answered carefully. There would have been pressure on liquidity. Pressure. A polite word for vulnerability. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This is unnecessary, she said. Your father has managed finances for decades. I'm not questioning experience, I replied evenly. I'm reviewing structure. That distinction mattered because this wasn't about ego. It was about stewardship. The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, a restructuring plan had been drafted, deleveraging the commercial property, reallocating capital into stable holdings, and establishing quarterly transparency reports. Under my oversight, when it was finished, my father remained seated while the others began gathering papers. Was this your plan? He asked quietly. To embarrass you? I looked at him directly. No. He held my gaze. You could have discussed this privately. I tried to discuss things privately for years, I said softly. My career, my decisions, my capability. He didn't respond immediately. This isn't about proving you wrong, I continued. It's about protecting what Grandma built. That landed because deep down, he respected structure, legacy, preservation. She trusted you, he said after a moment. Yes, I replied. And she didn't trust me? The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. I took a breath. I think she trusted both of us, I said carefully. But she knew I would ask questions. That wasn't an insult. It was a difference in approach. My father valued control. I valued analysis. We left the office separately. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. You didn't have to take everything. I stared at the screen. I hadn't taken everything. I had taken responsibility. But perception is powerful. The next week, word quietly spread through extended family that I was managing the estate. Some congratulated me, some judged me. A few sent cautious messages asking if there was conflict. I didn't engage in gossip. I focused on restructuring. Within 30 days, the leveraged exposure was reduced by 40%. Within 60 days, the portfolio was outperforming its previous quarterly trend. The numbers didn't argue. They validated. Then something unexpected happened. My father called. "Dinner," he said simply. "Just us." I hesitated, but I agreed. When I arrived, the atmosphere wasn't hostile. It wasn't warm either. It was reflective. Halfway through the meal, he put his fork down. "I underestimated you," he said. The words hung between us. Not dramatic. Not loud, but real. "You underestimated my choices," I replied gently. He nodded. "I thought independence meant instability. And now?" He looked at me steadily. "Now I see it can mean discipline." That was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from him. My mother spoke quietly. "We didn't ban you from the hospital to hurt you." "I know," I said. "We thought it would reduce tension. It created more," I answered softly. Silence followed. Not angry silence. Processing silence. For the first time, we weren't arguing about careers, or expectations, or pride. We were confronting the truth. Control had cost them trust, and trust had cost me goodbye. But Grandma's letter had changed the equation. She hadn't divided us. She had forced clarity. As I drove home that night, I realized something profound. The trust wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. It shifted the family dynamic from hierarchy to accountability. And for the first time, I wasn't defending my seat at the table. I owned it. But something told me this wasn't the final chapter. Because legacy isn't only about asset, it's about what you choose to do with power once you have it. And I had just begun. I thought I had seen everything. The assets, the liabilities, the restructuring clauses, the performance reports. I was wrong. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the attorney asked me to come in again. "There's an addendum we haven't discussed in detail," he said carefully over the phone. Addendum." I felt a strange chill in my chest. When I arrived, he placed a thin document in front of me. It was attached to the original trust paperwork, dated the same week as Grandma's final hospital admission. "She updated this shortly before she passed," he explained. I unfolded the page, and there it was, a conditional clause. If the trust remained under my sole management for 1 full calendar year, I would have full discretionary authority over all primary holdings, including the family estate property. But if I chose to reinstate shared oversight with my father before the year ended, the estate property would automatically transfer into a shared family holding structure. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't financial, this was psychological. Grandma had designed a test, not of competence, but of character. Did she explain why? I asked quietly. The attorney nodded. She said you would understand. That sounded like her, always trusting that I would read between the lines. If I kept control alone, the entire structure, including the estate home, would legally shift under my authority. If I invited my father back into shared control, we would operate as equals. Power or partnership? Protection or réconciliation? The clause wasn't about money. It was about whether I believed accountability could evolve into collaboration. I drove home slowly, replaying everything. The hospital hallway, the elevator doors closing, the voicemail about her passing, the will reading, the restructuring meeting, my father's quiet admission. I underestimated you. Grandma hadn't just left me control. She had left me a choice. That night, I walked through the old family estate house alone. I still had access. The attorney had arranged it. The place smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Memories lived in these walls. Sunday dinners, quiet chess games with Grandpa, Grandma's soft laugh from the kitchen. This house wasn't just property, it was identity. I stood in the living room and imagined 2 futures. In one, I maintained control, full authority, clean oversight, clear structure, no interference, no risk. In the other, I extended shared governance to my father. Transparent, equal, structured, riskier emotionally, but potentially healing. Grandma had always valued independence, but she also valued unity. She never believed in submission, and she never believed in unnecessary division. The next day, My father called unexpectedly. "I've been reviewing the new performance reports," he said. "And?" I asked. "You were right to restructure. It wasn't dramatic, but it was significant." Then he added something I didn't expect. "I didn't tell you something before." I stayed silent. "When the hospital decision was made, your grandmother asked about you." My throat tightened. "She said she didn't want her final days to feel like a battleground. She thought you would understand." I closed my eyes. She had protected both of us from an explosive goodbye. And maybe she had protected the possibility of something better. "There's something else," my father continued. "If you decide to keep full control, I won't fight you." That wasn't surrender. It was acknowledgement. After the call, I took out Grandma's letter again.